I don't know if you know this, but we had people lining up from midday to come to that.
Oh, wow.
We got them in, so you guys are amazing. They're over there. They're amazing. All right, so yes, just here.
Richard, thanks for helping me down from the agnostic fence. Two quick questions. One is, when you see somebody with impassioned beliefs, it seems like trying to get through to them, you must be aware of the fact that you're dealing with impaired neural pathways sometimes. And how do you, has there been a scientific study that shows that someone is trained and has impaired neural pathways?
Okay, so the question is, I'm sorry, I might get this wrong, I apologize if I do. So when you come into contact with people who are religious,
or strongly persuaded on the belief system.
Strongly persuaded on the belief system, do you feel that they have impaired neural pathways, and is there any research into that?
Is there a cognitive impairment to critical thinking when you believe so strongly in something?
Okay, is there an impairment to critical thinking when you believe so strongly in something? Great.
I'm an optimist. I'm optimistic enough to think that anybody can be persuaded if you persuade hard enough, and that's what I try to do. I recognise that there are times when you might as well give up, but then I like to think that when I'm arguing with somebody, say on a stage or on a radio program or something, that I may not persuade them, but my efforts to persuade them may persuade other people who are listening in. And there are enormous numbers of people who are not set in their ways, not totally convinced of anything, sitting on the fence, perhaps didn't even realise there was a fence to sit on, but now are ready to be persuaded, ready to listen, ready to start thinking for themselves critically.
I want to just add to that, that, you know, there's a real obstacle these people are trying to overcome, and Richard and I have both talked about it, and that is that we push these things down the throats of children. Well, we don't. I mean, yeah, and both of us in various contexts have called that child abuse and gotten in trouble for doing that. But it is, and it's very difficult to overcome those things. And I'll relate a little episode because, you know, Richard and I have had disagreements early on about how we do these things. But I guess when I really appreciated the consciousness raising that Richard does was one of the early times when I was listening to him talk, and he talked about, and I always get this wrong, but this Christmas picture in a newspaper of 3 or 4 kids, and it was a very pretty picture, and it had these little kids, and it said, you know, a Muslim child and a Jewish child and a Catholic child, and he pointed out, you know, we could have written a neoliberal child, an ultra-conservative child, a democratic child. If these children are too young,
an existentialist child.
Yeah, and you know, we label them. We label children by a faith that they don't know enough to have. And so I think that there's a real obstacle, and it's really hard to overcome things that are ingrained as a child, and I think that's another cognitive problem, frankly.
Okay, we have one down here, and then we'll come to you in a minute, I promise.
What impact do you think that clergy who have lost their faith and are now non-believers are going to have on the rise of secularism?
Okay, so the question is, what impact do you think that clergy who have now become non-believers are going to have on the rise of secularism? Right?
I think the questioner is referring to the initiative called the Clergy Project, which is something that I'm a huge supporter of. There are numerous clergymen, clergy women, clergy people who have actually lost their faith, but daren't say so, because they're trapped in the profession, it's the only profession they know, and it's how they earn their living, it's how they earn their respect in their community, it's why they're looked up to, it's what their families think of them as. And for a clergy person to suddenly announce, I'm an atheist, is a very, very difficult thing to do. The Clergy Project is an initiative whereby clergy people who've lost their faith can talk to each other in a confidential way on a website which we provide for them to do so, which the Clergy Project provides with support from various organizations, including my own foundation. And they're anonymous, they are secure, they can cry on each other's shoulders if that's what they want to do, they can discuss their problems together, and they can eventually come out. And some of them are doing so. And I think that this is a very revealing fact, that there are so many clergy people. I think there's something near 400 of them now enrolled in the Clergy Project. and that is sure to be the tip of the iceberg.
You know, Dan Dennett, who is in the film and a friend of ours, has been doing interviewing a lot of clergy people.
With Linda Lascola, his colleague.
And I don't know if, I thought he said something like about 30% of the clergy he interviewed claimed that they were ultimately atheists, which is really amazing.
Here, opposed to in America.
Okay, so the question was, how did Richard find the attitude towards his work and atheism when coming to Canada in respect to different places in the world?
I'm sorry to say I don't think I know enough about Canada. I mean, I love coming to Canada, but I don't think I've come to Canada enough to be able to form a judgment on that, certainly not a scientifically informed judgment. I have probably visited the United States enough to form a sort of opinion about the difference between the United States and Britain. But I think I would just have to plead ignorance on Canada, but certainly the reception that you've given this film tonight is immensely encouraging.
And you find us much more pleasant.
Well, you know, I often answer questions that are addressed to Richard. Because I grew up in Canada and moved to the United States. And, yeah, okay, so I'm Canadian content, as I like to say. But it helps with the film. But anyway, you know, I hate to say it. I mean, you know, I like Canada a lot, but there isn't I don't find a huge difference. And there are and I've gone up to Canada many times to talk up here, and there are real problems. You know, one of your Minister of Science, I remember, who's I think a creationist, but really upset me. I was just telling Richard in the legislature was asked at one point about evolution, and he said, "I don't want to talk about my religious beliefs."
Oh, for God's sake!
Yeah. So it's not as if Canadians always like to feel better than Americans. I can understand it.
He said that.
Yeah, he said that.
That was his religious belief.
Yeah.
He was asked a scientific question.
Yeah. So there's still ways to go, is all I want to say.
Do we have any in the balcony? I will come over to comments. Do you have any in the balcony? Oh, yeah. Wow, okay.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Okay, two-part question, if you don't mind. With nuclear physics, as we go deeper into the nuclear structure, and structure start thinking about personality, and theories like string theory, which really many people have a difficult time understanding, how do you respond to a religious person saying, well, you just have a different belief structure than me, you have more efficacy than mine? Secondly, how do you have a conversation with somebody that just screams platitudes at you and isn't listening?
Well, I think that was for you, the string theory. No, anyway. Well, let's see. It's a really important question.
The question.
Oh, the question. I repeat the question. Sorry, the question was, with very esoteric physics like string theory, which are really hard to understand, how do you talk to people who just say science is just a belief system, just like religion? There's no difference. And the second question was, how do you deal with someone who's just screaming platitudes at you? The second question is easier, which I think is Richard already answered. A lot of the time, I think when we debate, I've gone on Fox News, heaven forbid, and radio talk shows, fundamental shows. I think we know that the people we're talking to are not listening to us. But I think the hope is that people who are listening in the audience, who may be less biased, are going to get something out of it. Otherwise, it is a waste of time. But I think that's the hope that we have when we do that. As far as the string theory question, it's really a fascinating question, I think, because, and I've talked a lot about string theory in that context, among other things, because we have to point out there's a huge difference. It is true that string theory makes no predictions right now. And in fact, I've argued with my friend Brian Greene, and he gets upset when I say this, that it's not yet ready for prime time. And it isn't. It really hasn't been successful at all. But that doesn't mean people should stop working on it. The huge difference is that even people who worked on string theory their whole lives, if the slightest bit of evidence came up that the direction they were working on was wrong, they throw it out like yesterday's newspaper, like I talked about in the film. The great thing about science is that our faith is shakable. That we don't, even if something seems beautiful to us or elegant, if it's shown to be wrong, we throw it out. And I think and these people are trying hard not to just invent stories, because the biggest really misconception about science is it's just a bunch of stories. It's not. If it were just stories, it'd be like religion. It's stories that make predictions about things you haven't yet measured and give you some control over the world around you. And if string theory, all the people who are working on it, and they're friends of mine and some of my students, those are my best students, although I like to say some of my best students have been string theorists, I just wouldn't want my daughter to marry one. But they are all earnestly trying to do the same thing as I am. They're trying to make predictions about the world that we can test. And that's the fundamental difference. It's not a belief system. It's an effort to try and understand the world, test it, and be willing to prove yourself wrong. That's really important.
I'll just add something to that. In a way, it's a bit unfortunate that the questioner singled out string theory, because he could have talked about quantum theory more generally. And quantum theory, of course, is deeply mysterious, and many people can't really conceptualize what's going on in quantum theory. I think it was Feynman who said, if you think you understand quantum theory, you don't understand quantum